Guys, I make no apologies about starting like this because it's how our passage starts. But I'd love you to think about the last time someone you love died. How did you feel? Maybe you've never experienced that, but maybe you've experienced the hurt of a friend who's let you down and it's brought the death, if you like, of that friendship. Or maybe you've had a place in a team where you thought it was set and it was certain, but then it was snatched away from you, and everything that you thought would be certain became impossible. Just think about a scenario like that for a moment, would you? It can be really hard, can't it, when friends or family we love die? When friends we used to rely on say that they can no longer be there for us. When plans we thought were certain turned out to become impossible. When things we believed to be true turned out to be a lie. But God has something to say about that. You see, we're not the first people, of course we're not, to feel like this. Have a little look down at your Gospels. The first line, would you grab it? Don't worry about your booklets, worry about your Gospels primarily. And verse 1 says this, it says, after the Sabbath at the dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. You see, they've gone to a tomb because they've gone to pay their respects to a dead body, to a dead Jesus. They're probably feeling the worst they've ever felt. Perhaps something like the emotions that churned over your mind as we had that briefest of pauses. You know that horrible feeling when something bad happens and you wake up the next morning and there's that split, the tiniest of split seconds of peace before it hits you, of the realization of what was true the day before is still true today, and it's horrible. For them, Jesus, the most amazing man they've ever met. But more importantly, the man that they've come to worship as their king and learn to trust as their king is dead. And so with the death of Jesus went the death of their king. And with the death of their king went the death of everything they believed to be true. Now look, you're right to say, but hang on a minute, Larner, because this week we've been saying make way for the king, haven't we? We've been learning that Jesus is the king. On Monday, Paulie showed us that there's ways to live our life. There's different paths we can take. One leads to eternal destruction, and another leads to life in the full with Jesus in the new creation. But then Harris said that we live in the dark, don't we? So we're living in darkness, spiritually speaking, and we're not born good. We're not born in a relationship with Jesus, and we have to repent and believe, turn round, and step into the lights that revealed our sin to us. And last night, wasn't it amazing with Jen looking at the cross, the death of Jesus on the video and in the passage? And it was described to us in an amazing way through the passage, how the curtain was torn into the biggest, thickest, hugest curtain you've ever seen, so that people like me and you could step through and be in a relationship with God, a real personal relationship with God. But you get it, don't you, that if he's dead, none of that's true. You do know that, don't you? That Christians are jokes, are wastes of time, are kidding themselves, that Sports Plus is pointless, that Christianity is irrelevant if Jesus is dead. And I don't doubt for a second, actually, that all of those thoughts were going through the women's mind as they approached the tomb on that morning. Have we been done here? Is this for nothing? Went on holiday to the Lake District with a few friends last week. We were walking. I'm really not prepared for these sort of things. I haven't got hiking boots on. I didn't have flip-flops. I had trainers. But we were walking up, and I was pretty convinced it was this way. Another friend said that way. Anyway, a guy coming down, I'm talking about all the gear. He needs sticks to walk. Who needs sticks to walk? He's like that. He's got the boots on halfway up his ankles. He's got cagoule, everything. I said, look, excuse me, mate. Which way do we get to the top of this, one of the fells? He pointed us up. He said, well, to be honest, you could go this way or that way. Anyway, we followed his directions and we got to the summit, no problem, no harm done. But we didn't have to follow his advice. We probably could have taken another path and got there. And to be honest, even if we'd have gone the wrong way and not gone up the hill but ended up coming back down the hill, no drama, it's not the end of the world. And that's why life is nothing like climbing the fells in the Lake District. Life's more like climbing Everest, where the journey's longer and the stakes are higher. Because if you get lost, you die. You see, climbing Everest is a matter of life and death. And people have tried to climb it by different routes with different guides. And actually, sometimes it doesn't work out so well. Let me show you these two pictures. You've got a guide on the left, all the gear, nearly at the top. He's got his axes. He looks like he's the man. And then you've got someone else on the right, a genuine picture of a corpse, of a dead body, of someone who never made it to the summit. Reedy and I were looking for different pictures of people that we could put there, and that was the most, the one that was most palatable. You see these real corpses on the mountainside, and it's horrific. And I wonder if at this point in the story, in Matthew's gospel, I wonder if the women thought they'd chosen the wrong guide. Because Jesus is a corpse, at the end of 27, isn't he? Jesus is a corpse, he's dead. They've decided to follow him as their king, but that's the reality. Jesus is a bad guide to follow if he's dead. You get that, don't you? Who are good guides to follow? People who are alive. People who are powerful, people who have all the gear, people who are impressive, people who carry themselves, who talk the talk and walk the walk. That guy's a good guide, that guy's not. And at the moment, Jesus is that guy. Do you know who that guy is in our story? He's the Romans. Who are the Romans? The Romans are the ones stood there in all the gear outside the tomb. They've put the nails through Jesus' hands at the cross. They've killed him. And then they're taking the mick out of him, they're drawing lots, and they're splitting up his clothes as they pull down this limp, dead body. They've put him in a tomb, and then they're guarding it because they know that they're in control, and the bloke who's dead behind them is not. I wonder if Jesus' followers had picked up on that. The two Marys and the other disciples. I wonder if they'd realized that following Jesus was a bad idea, and actually the Romans looked pretty impressive all of a sudden, I wonder if they thought, all my neighbors are, following the Romans. All my neighbors worship Caesar as king. All my mates at work, actually, none of them believe in Jesus. And tell you what, neither do I at the moment. Do you ever feel like that? Feel the way that the women must have felt. Jesus is dead, and the people who never believed that he was who he says he was were right all along. Christianity is irrelevant. And powerful people that look impressive, they do know best after all, don't they? It's the reality of my hockey team, the hockey teams that I coach, the hockey teams that I play in. I think, I can count on one hand the amount of people who has worshipped Jesus as their king in the sports team I've played in the last 10 years. Dozens and dozens of good mates worship their own kings, or they live with their life with themselves as king. At my school, actually, I can't think of a teacher I had at school who thought that Jesus was the king. All thought that there was some other king out there, that they could work it out for themselves. My family, very fortunate, in my opinion. Mum and dad are Christians, my brothers are Christians. But quite a good number of my wider family actually don't think Jesus is the king. And, at this stage in the story, 27 chapters of Matthew's gospel and a verse, they're winning, aren't they? They're right. But guys, what happens next changes everything forever for everyone. Let me just read verses 2 to 4 together and follow it with me if you would. There's a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him they shook and became like dead men. See, the resurrection of Jesus, like an earthquake, shatters and fractures everything that we think to be stable. It turns the world upside down. It flip reverses everything that seems to be true and seems to be false. You see, Jesus was not a dead corpse with empty promises. He is the one who is alive and can be trusted. And the human authorities, the Roman guards that stood there proud and in control, well, even the glimpse of an angel who had been with God made them like dead bodies. You saw that, didn't you? Let's read that again in verse 4. The guards were so afraid of him, that's the angel, that they shook and became like dead men. You see, the resurrection has just changed everything, hasn't it? The resurrection has changed everything. Well, who are you going to trust now? And at this point, for some, and I really get this, the answer will be this. Look, yeah, but I get it, Larner. I get that you're saying that the Bible claims that Jesus to be alive. People have written it down. We do talks about it at Sports Plus. But I'm not just going to follow someone, live with someone as my king and say no to all the things that my mates are doing because it says so in an old book. I need proof. It was ages ago. I need to see things with my own eyes to believe it. That's normally how I make decisions. But look, you believe the Romans, don't you? As we read that passage, you didn't go, sure about these Romans. Were they really kicking around? You're really old. You've never seen a Roman centurion, have you? Doesn't mean there's no proof for the Romans, of course. No, of course not. We study them in school. We read about eyewitness accounts of sources. It's supported by archaeological, get that right, evidence. And guys, it's no different when it comes to Jesus. The evidence is vast. And actually so much more so because as we've been seeing this week, Matthew's gospel and even the whole of the Old Testament predicts Jesus' death and resurrection. We can go back another 2,000 years and see how blokes that had never met and had never talked to each other and didn't quite know what was going to happen made these incredible predictions, and every single one came true except one or two. And those are the ones about Jesus coming back, which he will. This is the amazing news about the resurrection because it proves that he is the king. You want proof, Jesus gives it to you. You want evidence, we see it here in this book. We don't need to worry about whether he can be trusted because Jesus' comeback, Christ's comeback confirms he's the king. We don't need to worry that human authorities, that teachers, parents, friends, family don't think that Jesus is true because his comeback confirms he's the king. And Jesus' invitation to each and every one of us here this evening is the same invitation that he gave to those two women that were there at the time. Have a little look down at verse 9. It's a weird thing that happens. I'm just going to read the first half. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. Sounds a bit like a lame word, doesn't it? Greetings. If someone said that to you, you'd be like, oh, yeah, greetings. It's weird. But it means rejoice. It means celebrate. You know, we could even go as far to say it just means party. You know, this is great. Celebrate. You see, Jesus invited them to celebrate the fact that his comeback confirms he's the king. Look, stop crying, stop worrying, stop doubting, stop questioning everything. I'm alive. My comeback confirms I'm the king. I wonder what it would look like for you to accept that. A second thing happens, a close second, an obvious logical next step. Let's keep reading the rest of that verse. Greetings, he said to them. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped them. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers, and go to Galilee. There they will see me. You see, what it looks like for us to accept Jesus' invitation is exactly the same as what it looks like for the women to accept it. You see, they knelt before their king and they worshipped him. You know, effectively, they took the crown off their own head and they put it at his feet and they wept because their king was alive. And then what did they do? Well, they went to tell others. They went and told others, look, the king's alive. Stop crying. Stop questioning things. You don't have to believe in these man-made ideas that are going to die. You can trust him because he's alive. Look, come on, think about yourself now. Zoom in on your own situation, sat where you are. Not me, not the person next to you. What would it look like for you to accept Jesus' invitation this evening? Look, maybe for some of you, same for me, you've been a Christian for a little while, but if you're honest, there are times in your Christian life where kind of Romans in your life seem more real and Jesus seems more dead, really. You know, whether the Romans are kind of your unbelieving friends, you know, peer pressure at school, that's who we want to please, that's who looks impressive. Or whether it's your family, maybe you come from a family where, you know, your parents or your siblings who you love, you know, they're not too sure about this Jesus guy actually. Happy for you to go on camp if you enjoy it, but, you know, king? A bit much. Or maybe even just, in the media, this kind of narrative of kind of British values. Or you see on Facebook, you see famous kind of people, famous atheists who mock God and kind of ridicule him. See, no one at Sports Plus, no serious Christians denying that they seem powerful in this life. But just like the Romans, those people and their beliefs will be dead men when they meet King Jesus. They'll be corpses. And is that not hugely encouraging as we head back to a changing room, to a team, to a classroom full of people who think Jesus is not the king? Maybe this week's the first time you've ever been convicted to make way for King Jesus in your life. If you like, the risen Jesus has kind of walked off the pages as you've read it in your Bible studies, in the talks, in the water break studies. It's almost as if, and I think this was true for me, it's almost as if the truths about Jesus were the truest things I've ever heard. They were truer than any truth that I trusted. Well, look, if you haven't done that already, friends, if you think that's true, do take the crown off your head and place it at Jesus' feet and celebrate. Because if that's you this week, you've gone from worshipping corpses and heading on a life that will lead to you being a corpse, to worshipping the risen King and heading on a life that will mean that you will live forever with him too. And look, if that's not worth celebrating, I honestly don't know what is. Maybe as we finish, maybe you've trusted Jesus as your King for a little while, but you've never told anyone about him, where they can meet him for themselves. The women, Jesus said to the women in the last verse, said, look, go to the disciples, your friends, people who know me, go to them and say, I'll meet them in Galilee. Now, look, our mates aren't going to meet Jesus in Galilee, but they are going to meet him in this book. They are going to meet him in the Bible. They're going to meet him when his word is taught faithfully. Why not invite a friend to camp next year if you think this is true? You got a mate at school, say, look, why don't you come along and hear these things I've come to find are the truest truths I've ever heard? Or invite them along to your church youth group or school Christian union. Tell them about the great week you've had at camp and say, actually, I've got this Matthew's Gospel. I got two, my mate, left one in the dorm. If you want it, you can read it. The last thing worth saying is what it looks like if you reject that invitation. Well, it looks like this, doesn't it? Go back to the slide, Rudy. It looks like that picture on the right. That is what it looks like to reject Jesus' invitation. It can be quite cool to reject Jesus, can't it? Feel like you're part of the in crowd. Let me tell you that you're not. You might feel alive now, but you're a corpse waiting to die. You see, sure, our mates at school who don't believe this might seem more powerful and authoritative and like they've got it going on now. But look, when they meet Jesus, they'll be like dead people. Those Romans, they only saw the angel. Your mates will meet God himself. And if at the end of your life you haven't submitted to Jesus and you haven't taken the crown off your own head, look, the same will be true for you. I wouldn't be a good, good bloke, good friend, good leader if I didn't tell you that was true. But look, let's end on a high, because marvelously, that needn't be the case for anybody in this room this evening. Because this week, if you've been listening and if you've been paying attention, every single one of us have heard that Jesus is the King. And tonight we've seen that the resurrection confirms that it's true. And that if we follow him, we're following the only King who's alive, who's come back from the dead, and who promises if we follow him, he'll lead us safely to an eternal salvation in the new creation, which will be incomparable. I'm going to say a quick prayer. The band's going to come up and we're going to sing in response to what we've heard. Heavenly Father, you're so good to us. You've done everything for us. You've opened blind eyes and you shed light into darkness, and you've given us the evidence that it's all true. At the same time, the buck stops with us, and we ask that each and every one of us, your Spirit would help us tonight to make informed and sensible decisions, knowing that the consequences are eternal, that this is life and death we're talking about. But thank you that you've made it plain to us, and thank you that it's the greatest news ever told. Amen.